the objects which are being carried in like manner, they would only see the shadows. And if they were able to converse with one another, would they not suppose that there were names what was actually before them? And suppose further that there was an echo which came from the wall. Would they not be sure to think when one of the passers-by spoke that the voice came from the passing shadows? To them, the truth would be literally nothing but the shadows of the images. And now look again and see what will naturally follow if one of the prisoners is released.
When this was made, it was high tech.
Suddenly to stand up and turn his head round and look towards the light. All this would hurt him, and he would be much too dazzled to see distinctly those things whose shadows he had seen before. And then conceive someone saying to him that what he saw before was an illusion. But that now, when he is approaching nearer to reality and his eyes turn toward more real existence, he has a clearer vision. What will be his reply? You may further imagine that his instructor is pointing to the objects as they pass and requiring him to name them. Will he not be perplexed? Will he not think that the shadows which he formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown to him? I suppose once more that he is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent and held fast till he is forced into the presence of the sun himself. When he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled. He will not be able to see anything at all in what are now called realities. He will require to grow accustomed to the sight of the upper world. First he will see the shadows best. Next the reflections of objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. Then he will gaze upon the stars of the spangled heavens and the light of the moon. He will see the sky and the stars by night. Last of all, he will be able to see the sun. And not mere reflections of it in the water, but he will see the sun in its own proper place, and not in another. And he will contemplate the sun as it is. Imagine once more such a one coming suddenly out of the sun to be replaced in his old situation. Would he not be certain to have his eyes full of darkness? And if there were a contest of measuring the shadows, and he had to compete with the prisoners who had never moved out of the den, while his sight was still weak, and before his eyes had become steady, wouldn't they all laugh at him and say he had spoiled his eyesight by going up there? But it was better not to even think of assembling. And is anyone trying to release another and lead him up to the light? Let them only catch the offender, and they would put him to death.
So it's an allegory, so you can make up your own mind about what it's supposed to actually represent. But if we think about it as representing the divided line theory, and by the way, there's tons of videos. This is ancient stuff, and everybody's been playing with it. The kind of official dogma behind this is, in this particular life, where we see everything in the physical sense, that's being in the cave and being chained to the wall. And so basically, as far as Plato is concerned, everything we see physically are just nothing but shadows. What we really want to know, of course, is the true things that we see in the light of the sun. And if you think of the sun as the good, and everything is those abstract ideas in Plato's mind, that's the true, the things that are unchanging, mostly mathematics for us here, right? So mathematics is great, but once you get beyond mathematics, everything else is kind of fictitious, right? You know, it's temporary. And so if you really want to know the truth, your focus should be on the abstract, the ideal, not the physical things that we need in order to live. So, you know, when we talk about the tripartite form of life during the Middle Ages, the monks are the ones that are doing that. They're supposed, you know, they do have jobs. The monasteries didn't survive just on the largesse of the community. They also were supposed to go out sometime during the day and you know, raise crops and maybe make brandy. You know, there's pretty famous for a lot of that, and so on. And most of the time, though, they would be learning, maybe writing texts, you know, singing praise in honor of, you know, the glory of God and so on. So their focus was on a very abstract life. The military, of course, are supposed to be protecting each community from the others. You know, the feudal system was terrible, right? And the serfs, of course, are leading the physical life. But you can see the hierarchy in that whole approach, that elitism. We still use that, for example, when we say, why do you go to college? Learning for the sake of learning. Learning not to get a job, but, you know, basically to know things, because the closer your soul is to knowing everything, the closer you are to God, basically, right? So that's where a lot of that comes from. But how do we form a government where we end up giving to each his own? Well, what we need to do is form a government where the best are the rulers. So he claims what we need is the aristocracy, the ones who are the wise, who've gotten to the point where they're the wise, and they should be the rulers. And by the way, they're not interested in physical things, so the rest of the people keep them alive basically by housing them in kind of like a monastery, but they don't want physical things, so it shouldn't be too difficult just keeping them alive, right? By the way, for Plato, men and women are able to compete for all of these jobs and everything else. That's, I think, chapter or book 8, where they have an interesting discussion about how women are equal to men. Did that ever actually materialize in any society? No, not really, not yet. But nonetheless, in this idealistic framework, they talk about it. So you get this idea of the justice is the society that's arranged this way, etc. So thank you, Plato and the Republic. Another dialogue that I wanted to mention before we move on to Aristotle, and this actually sets us up to move on to Aristotle, is the Parmenides. I always say Parmenides, but that's wrong. It's Parmenides. So two unchanging ideas, and this is where you end up getting Zeno's paradoxes and things of that sort. And what's it going to do? So this is a ladder dialogue. Remember, Plato's dialogues are broken up into 3 sections. The early dialogues, which are all about the asshole Socrates and the kinds of things he did. What did she call him? She called him she called him something nicer than an asshole. A butthead. Okay. Isn't that a real character in a TV show? Butthead?
He is a butthead,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So that's mean, right? But in any case, so the early dialogues are all about Socrates. The middle period is where Plato invents these crazy ideas, which I agree with you. These are absolutely unscientific, fictitious, persuasive somehow. Maybe why? Why? Was it the first, attempt to explain these relationships, perhaps? Remember, with the time period of Plato, they didn't have much before that. If you remember Eric Havelock's book, The Muse Learns to Write, they were just beginning to learn definitions and trying to define things. And so it's a real early period for human thinking. So this is a very early stage for us. It's still with us. We still have lots of cultural icons associated with it. But does it make sense? Well, Parmenides is one of the latter dialogues, and the latter dialogues are the ones that demonstrate just how screwed up this is. So, for example, in the Parmenides, you get a concern about degrees of things. So, like colors. When I think about colors today, and we think of the primary colors and so on. By the way, this is kind of an intriguing problem for the Greeks, because when we look at Homer and his Odyssey and his Iliad, how many colors do they have in we call them poems. So limited, if you're familiar with the famous phrase, the wine dark sea, you think, what the heck are they talking about? Because wine is usually reddish. So they're not, are they suggesting that the sea was wine colored? The thesis I've heard is that they weren't really using those words to describe colors, but qualities of the reflective characteristics of the water. So the sparklingness might have been what they were talking about. Who knows? There's a book, by the way, called Through the Language Glass, I think. And it even mentions that there. Through the Language Glass. The neat thing about that is at one point, one of the British prime ministers, who was a Greek ancient language expert, tried to figure this, why did they have such few colors in the ancient Greeks? And he thought that maybe our eyesight was evolving. The interesting thing is that he was a contemporary of Darwin, so everybody was getting on the hype over evolution at the time. And so his thesis was that our eyesight can see more colors now than the Greeks could. No one agrees with that anymore, but still is interesting. In any case, I got lost. Where am I? That's all interesting, so my mind goes way over there. Squirrel. I'm trying to find my way back. What were we talking about? Okay, so Parmenides, degrees. What you've got are, what about all these other colors? Have you ever gone to Sears? Well, no, we don't have a Sears anymore. Where do you go if you're going to buy paint?
Lowe's or Home Depot.
Home Depot?
Lowe's.
Or Lowe's? Yeah, so someone sends you, go buy some white paint for the wall. How many different types of white paint do they have?
Too many.
A lot. It's almost as bad as Freddy's, right? Your wife sends you, go get some carrots. you go to the store and there's 80 different kinds of carrots. You know, you're trying to figure out what kind of carrot. Pizza sauce. Malcolm Gladwell, did you ever read him? He was talking about the invention of all the different kinds of spaghetti sauces. You know, it used to be that you had one spaghetti sauce you could buy, you know, and then, you know, somebody thought, hey, you know, let's make different kinds of spaghetti sauces. You know, and the chefs were upset because they knew what